Hello, my name is David Hafley, and this is a video from the United Skim Tour explaining the current priority rules. The basics of these rules are very simple, but we also go through the details of these rules in depth in this video. It's with the help of these rules that we aim to promote a fair, competitive format for professional skimboarding. The basics of priority are simple. The priority judge will hold a paddle in the air to indicate the rider with first priority. The rider with first priority has the right-of-way to catch the wave they want and ride it as they see fit. Riders without priority must yield and not interfere with the priority rider. It is the responsibility of the rider without priority to be aware of the priority rider and avoid them. If a rider without priority does interfere, that rider will receive a penalty. In general, priority will use a dedicated priority judge equipped with colored paddles who observes and enforces the following rules: priority allocation, use of priority, interference, and abuse of priority. The decisions regarding priority allocation and use of priority are judgment calls, often somewhat subjective in nature. However, all interference calls, and thus interference penalties, will be made considering the paddle in the air. If you are ever unsure, always look to the priority judge who will have the colored paddle in the air for the rider who has first priority. Priority allocation. The rider who has been waiting the longest since their last ride will be allocated first priority. The priority judge will hold up a colored paddle to indicate the rider with first priority. During the beginning of the heat, before anyone has ridden a wave, priority is determined by seeding in the event. This is called the starting priority. For starting priority in round 1, the highest seeded rider will receive first priority. The second highest seeded rider will receive second priority, and so on. As the rounds progress, the riders who placed well in higher seeded heats will be ordered according to their performance in the prior heat. As a competitor, all you need to know is that your jersey determines where you sit in the priority queue at the start of the heat. For example, in this example bracket, the rider in green will have priority at the start of the heat. The rider in red will have second priority at the start of the heat, and the rider in yellow will have third priority at the start of the heat. To be clear, the colors for starting priority may be different for each contest, but this order will remain consistent throughout each contest. If you have questions about starting priority order before a heat starts, please ask the priority judge. There are two primary benefits of priority. The first benefit is that the rider with priority has the right of way to catch the wave they choose and ride it as they see fit. Keep in mind, the rider with priority has the right to catch a wave late, even after another rider has already caught and is riding that wave. Riders without priority must make a reasonable effort to understand the intent of the rider with priority and avoid that rider. The second benefit is that if two or more riders run for the same wave, the rider with priority will receive the judge's full attention. This is to ensure the rider with priority is scored accurately. Please note that the riders without priority can still run for the same wave and will still receive scores for their rides to the best of the judge's ability. However, the judges are much more likely to miss details of those rides. If you do not have priority, it is often in your best interest to wait until you have the judge's undivided attention. Use of priority. A rider will move to the bottom of the priority queue when they initiate running for a wave, verbally commit to a wave, or block another rider. Initiating running for a wave can be as little as a single committed step. Further, if the rider with priority holds their board in ready position for an extended period of time or during the critical takeoff moment for a wave, the priority judge may consider this blocking and may consider this a use of priority, and then move that rider to the bottom of the priority queue. To reiterate, the rider who has been waiting the longest has first priority. If two riders go for the same wave, the priority judge will determine who gets priority over the other based on two things: who has possession of their board and feet in the sand, wet or dry. In other words, you are not eligible for priority if you're still swimming. The first rider to meet both criteria, board in hand and feet on sand, gets priority. Now also please note there is no foot race to the top of the slope or to the takeoff zone. Running to the takeoff zone does not determine priority. Also, these calls are often close calls, and they're not up for debate. The priority judge's decision is final and will be used in any potential interference rulings. As mentioned earlier, interference is based on the paddle in the air. If you are ever unsure of who has priority, always check the paddle in the air. Any skimboarder who hinders the scoring potential of a rider who has higher priority will be flagged for an interference penalty. If an incident is flagged, the judging panel and the priority judge will discuss the incident after the heat and vote on whether to confirm the interference. Interference can be called if a rider without priority A. collides, rides too closely, or alters the wave shape of the rider with higher priority, B. crosses the running or riding path of a rider who has higher priority within 10 feet, or C. blocks the pathway of a rider with priority. Please note, collisions are a presumed major interference penalty, and crosses within 10 feet are a presumed minor interference penalty. As stated earlier, confirming any call will happen at the end of the heat and may take several minutes of discussion by the judging panel. For standard flagged interferences, a unanimous vote from the judging panel is required to confirm the call and apply a penalty. For presumed penalties, such as collisions or crossing within 10 feet, only a simple majority is required to confirm. By that, we mean 3 of 5 judges on a 5-judge panel or 2 of 3 judges on a 3-judge panel. Once an interference is confirmed, the contest director, head judge, or priority judge will explain the infraction and the resulting penalty to all the riders involved. During the confirmation process, the judging panel and priority judge may use any available video evidence to help verify and confirm a flagged interference. Video review is not required, but it will be used if available. If you, as a rider or a spectator, have video related to a priority call that you believe was missed or needs to be reviewed, please bring it to the contest director or the head judge as soon as possible, and before the next round begins. After that point, it may no longer be considered. Please note, video review can only be used to verify whether an interference is confirmed. Video review cannot be used to determine priority allocation or use of priority. The paddle in the air will always act as the call on the field. There are 3 unique penalties for interference, including the priority abuse penalty, which will be explained in just a minute. These penalties are a major interference penalty, a minor interference penalty, and a priority abuse penalty. In each of these situations, the ride during which the skimboarder interfered will be scored as 0 points. After an interference is flagged, the interfering rider will drop to the bottom of the priority queue. With a major interference penalty, the offending rider will have their highest score dropped, and only 2 of 3 waves count on the rider's scoreline. By default, any interference penalty is a major penalty unless otherwise downgraded. With a minor interference penalty, the offending rider will have their highest score dropped, but the remaining top 3 scores will count for the rider's scoreline. An interference may be downgraded from a major to a minor penalty if the interfering rider made all reasonable attempts to avoid interfering, but nevertheless did interfere. With a priority abuse penalty, the 3rd highest score is dropped, but the rider will still have 3 scoring rides. In essence, instead of the top 3 scores counting for this rider will have the 1st, 2nd, and 4th highest scores count for their scoreline. Priority abuse is a penalty to discourage riders from abusing priority to draw an interference with little to no apparent intent to generate a score from the wave. Given that the judges are unable to discern intent, a priority abuse call will be based on the following 3 criteria: A priority abuse can only be called if all three conditions are met. A, the rider without priority made a clear and reasonable attempt to understand the intent of the rider with priority. B, the rider with priority did not make a reasonable attempt to indicate intent to ride the wave, either verbally or by picking up their board before running. C, the rider with priority rode the wave in such a way that the rider without priority was forced to interfere. If these three criteria are met, the rider with priority may receive a priority abuse penalty. If confirmed, the rider without priority will not receive any penalty. To reiterate, with a priority abuse penalty, the rider's third highest wave from the heat is dropped, but 3 scoring rides still count. This penalty was intentionally designed to be less severe because the rider with priority should not feel afraid to use the right-of-way. Priority abuse will be called when obvious, but anyone who is using their priority as intended should not feel at risk. If you have priority and you're running for a wave and you feel there is potential for priority abuse to be called, you can make your intent extra clear by verbally calling out to other riders that you are going for the wave. If provided in time, verbal indication will likely be enough to avert any potential priority abuse penalty. That's our video on priority rules for the United Skim Tour events. As said multiple times throughout this video, the decisions on priority allocation are ultimately judgment calls in the opinion of the priority judge. However, any potential interference call, and thus interference penalty, will be made considering the paddle in the air. As stated earlier, it's with the help of these rules that we aim to promote a fair competitive format for professional skimboarding.